Thank you, and welcome to CBTS Tech Talk. I'm the producer, Lance Hart, and today we'll be talking about the unnecessary risk of missed patches. I'm joined by two extremely knowledgeable techs that will do a little talking today. It might get a little confusing because it's two Johns. We've got John Bruggeman, as always, our consulting CISO, and John Lloyd, Global Solution Architect. Johns, let's jump right in.
Yeah, so you have the unnecessary silent letter in your first name, and then I've got the unnecessary silent letter in the double L's of my last name. So works out.
Yes, silence is golden in one sense. Okay, so let's talk about patching. I know it's the top topic for every IT professional. They all want to talk about patching, but I look at it from the cybersecurity perspective.
Sure.
Namely, when you think about patching, virtually every attack leverages a vulnerability that hasn't been patched at this point in time. And so it's a direct correlation. If you don't do patching, you're going to be vulnerable. There's going to be excessive risk. And one of the things you want to think about is, okay, great. How do I know what to do? And where do I get started? So what are you seeing out in the field?
Yeah, I always equate that, like, how do you tie this into your security program? And when we start talking with customers and you ask, what are you doing around security? You'll learn all about their MDR, EDR, SIM, SOAR, tools, all these things, tools, people, all that. And I equate it to putting, a deadbolt and 3 chains on your front door and then leaving the window completely wide open, right? It is a part of that program. Now, why does it not get done? Well, for a couple of reasons I tend to see, where it's almost kind of custodial work. It's wildly important, but not a lot of people want to do it. And I think we'll talk through kind of getting into that program and things like that later. But as we frame it up, and I'd love to hear, kind of sitting in the CISO seat, I watch these events that happen. You mentioned it always comes back to a vulnerability. I watch these events where the pipeline, right, gets ransomware.
Yes, Columbia. Yeah.
Or naming names.
Sorry.
Right. No, it's fine. It's fine. I don't think we're good. It's public record. It is. But we try. We watch the blame game trickle up and then trickle back down. You have Columbia go, oh, it was Microsoft's fault, right? It's the OEM's fault, and then all of a sudden you have Microsoft coming back and going, well, here's the patch that we put out for that
in March
months ago, right? Yeah. And now it starts to trickle back down. So it's kind of the low level guy says, oh, I made somebody aware of it, and it trickles up to the CISO, and then the FBI is involved, and then you blame the OEM, and then you watch that blame trickle all the way back down, and it's typically to, we didn't do a patch. So as you sit there as a CISO and you look at building attack surface management and this whole security strategy, where does patching fit into that if you're running a security program?
For me, when I ran my program, it was never a lot of fun to do patching because you always risk breaking something. And you never want to apply a patch from Windows. I mean, if you're a Windows shop, it's very easy. Microsoft is very regular. They push out, it's Patch Tuesday. I pretty much post about Patch Tuesday the Wednesday afterwards, so it's the second Tuesday of the month, and let people know what vulnerabilities has Microsoft patched that day. I don't recommend putting that patch on Wednesday.
Right.
You don't typically, at least not in production. You can certainly do it in your test environment, or
let it bake in. Let somebody else be the first.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where I had patching near the top of my list because I was hit with the distributed denial of service attack in 2001 when I was running my shop, and that's what got me into cybersecurity. So I know that we're only as strong as our weakest link. It's pithy, but it's true. So you want to make sure that you are doing regular patching, and to do it well, like you said, it's a program. People kind of sometimes tilt their head like, what are you talking about? It's a program. And they confuse it. What you want to do is you want to be regular about it. You want to put it on your schedule. I blocked out 4 hours of, maintenance time every month to apply patches. I wasn't lucky enough to have a real test environment where I could simulate everything, but I wanted to make sure that if something went wrong, you got to have a way to back that patch back out.
Right.
Because you don't want to have a blue screen of death and discover, oh no, now I don't have a way to get back and recover my system. So it was a regular part of my day-to-day operations. Identify the patches, put them on the schedule them, and get them in there.
And what about, so there's a ton of great tools, right? And we
Yes.
use tools when we help customers.
Big fix.
Big Fix is obviously, it's one we use. I think it's the big winner in that space, but not even just patching tools, automation tools, right?
Yes.
Running, Ansible playbooks, things like that. There's a lot of ways that you can relieve some of that burden. At the end of the day, though, you still need to inspect what you expect.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Or was it a successful patch? Did I was using SCCM and we were applying the patch. We had a 2-hour window. We hit 2 hours. It just stopped.
Yeah.
Right. Or I know 80%.
We ran out of drive space.
Right. I was going to say 80% of my PCs, right? I don't know if it was because the memory was full or they never came online or what were my distribution points or relays in the network. Do I need them to be? There's a lot of complexity. You can go and build all of the tools and have all of the logos and spend a pretty penny. On the flip side, good luck going and hiring, an army of engineers who do this day in and day out, as opposed to maybe somebody kind of that oversees the program with some junior engineers or people kind of getting started out in the program. And I tend to see quite a bit that when I talk to customers, they say, we have patching. Okay,
Right.
Tell me about it. And they tend to restart every 12 months. We've got some junior level folks. You mentioned Patch Tuesdays, second Tuesday, let it burn in. We go to push it out. You mentioned only 4 hours. That was, some time ago. I'm sure it's more now. But I do it for 12 months. At that point, I'm still doing 60% other things. So I'm getting more knowledgeable in our network, our business. Maybe I'm getting certs, doing other things. So now after a year, I don't want to keep being the patching person.
Oh God, no! It is the boringest. I mean, in one sense, it's not sexy. It's not typically considered as valuable in one sense. And you're right. You get somebody who's trained up and knows how to do it. Next thing you know, they want to move on to something else. They don't want to be a patch person every. That's not their job, and that's not their only job in their mind. So it's a challenge to keep that staffed.
So when we, from a CBTS perspective, when we go and help customers, and we're helping large enterprises globally with this patching, when we always say it's a program, talk to me a little bit. What's tools? What's people? What's the right mix? What's success look like in a patching program?
Well, when we think about patching and as it relates to cybersecurity, not only is it a cybersecurity component, but it also gives you stability. I mean, because frequently when you have a patch, the patch is there to fix a vulnerability that you either did know you have or didn't know you had. I mean, sometimes some people, I remember I got help desk calls while I was still the director and the CIO. People say, John, my printer won't print, or my screen just, went smaller, and you look into it and, oh, there was a patch for your particular motherboard that you had to have applied. And once you get it applied, now your video display is working correctly, or the screen doesn't, you don't get a blue screen, or the application doesn't fail. So it's more than just security for patching. You can get performance advantages, you can get stability. You can also get compliance and regulatory, because some, regulations issued by the federal or state and local governments, or even organizations like PCI, you got to do it to stay compliant. So, compliance is not security. We all know that. But the tools that you want to put in place, it is people, process, and tools. You got to have good people. You have to have a good process, and you have to have useful tools. And you're right. You can use it with, a big name tool like Big Fix. You could use SSCM. You can do, Windows, the other one that
Intune.
Yeah. And, I love Intune. I mean, Intune, getting the visibility on the endpoints is fantastic. I mean, the ability to see what people are doing when you're joined to the, the domain, it's fantastic. You can see whether or not they didn't let you apply the patch. Sometimes people are like, you see that little exclamation point that's telling you that you need to restart your computer. And they're like, no, I'm too busy. I'm like, you can't be busy 24 hours a day.
Well, that's what I think. Like we talk about all the time, like the biggest weakness in any security, program is the end employee, right? We do training.
They're the whipping people. Yeah. I mean,
and you've got, you might have one data center or, 5 buildings, but 5,000 employees, right? Who are accessing from all these different devices, who aren't as security minded. Almost a lot of organizations now, you see the email says caution, this is from outside, or, don't click. So everybody's trying to solve that. Who is the end employee, right? That's my easiest access for a bad actor. And I know from my world, 5 years ago, if I was working from home, I was VPNing in every day. Now, I know we got some security folks in the room. I still do VPN in, wink, wink. Yeah. But I do more than most, and I do when I'm in like a hotel or an airport and things like that.
You should always use a VPN when you're out on the road.
Yeah,
yes.
PSA, trying to keep the security folks happy. But realistically, when I'm working,
stay secure, not just keeping us happy.
Well, doesn't that make you happy when we?
Oh my gosh, it
secure,
definitely
right?
makes me happy. But really, I'm just a security advocate or an evangelist, whatever word you want to use. It is definitely important to, not just from a security standpoint and a stability standpoint and a compliance standpoint and a data risk standpoint, you want to have a good patching program in place to address those vulnerabilities, because what we really want to do is reduce the attack surface. I mean, you did mention people, which is probably a separate talk altogether, because I think we've covered the stuff that's on the deck that we've talked about here. But basically, people will do what we encourage them to do. So if we give them the right tools and we give them information as to why they should apply a patch, or why they should hit that reboot, install the update, let's move on. I think that would be great. It does take effort, but as we get back to the topic of patching, so let's say you agree that it's a risk, that cybersecurity and patching are related. Then we want to talk about the program. How do you do it? What does a successful patching program look like? In my mind, you get buy-in from the top. You got to have leadership that agrees that they want to reduce the risk. And I can tell you this, if you talk to your CFO, they want to reduce risk because there's a direct correlation between risk and exposure and expense. So one of the people that I would usually go to get buy-in is the CFO. I don't know if you see that much. I don't know who you normally get to talk to, whether it's always the IT or if you get the risk side of the house that want to say, how much should I spend on vulnerability management? That would be a great question for a CFO to ask somebody.
I think finance is always a part of it. It typically, and this is I want your take on, it typically starts with the network team. Yeah. I don't know if that's just the customers I interact with. It seems like all patching tends to fall to the network to own, right? Obviously, you need to work with the application teams. You need to work with the server teams. You need to, obviously, like I was talking about, people not VPNing in. How do we patch their PCs off network, that sort of stuff.
Right.
There's other departments, but we tend to see that, the networking team. That is then quickly dotted line to the CISO, who's struggling. I see a lot of customers typically have a grasp on vulnerability. I want to come back to you because there is some tools, some really good tools to help you understand at least a quantity. Yes. Maybe you need help qualifying it, but hey,
you now have 250,000 vulnerabilities.
It's the Men in Black scene where he says, there's a Starship Destroyer right above it. And Tommy Lee Jones says, calm down, man. There's always a Starship Destroyer above it. It's like you always have a million vulnerabilities. It doesn't mean they're all going to get you ransomware. And we'll talk. I want to talk about that in a second.
Okay.
But I see network team dotted line to the CISO. The CFO or the finance team is so heavily involved because we see two factors. One is E&O policy, cybersecurity, insurance.
Oh, yes.
The requirements of what those premiums look like. Sometimes it's to reduce premium. Sometimes it's we will not do it. We will not insure you without. And then the second is how you typically, most people go automatically to solve that is we need to go hire people. We need bodies. And then we get back into this 12-month refresh life cycle of people moving on to other things. So I guess, how do you correlate if you are a CISO and you've run an automated scan, right? You've run Tenable and it said you have 800,000 vulnerabilities. What do you do next? What is
prioritize? And there's a couple different ways you can do that. If you're doing it in-house, and this is definitely something you can do in-house, you have to have a good skill set, or at least a person or two people, depending on the size of your organization, that can understand the output from Nessus. Because you will get, let's make up an example. You're a decent sized organization. You've got 10,000 endpoints and plus 1,000 servers. You run a Nessus scan. You're going to come back potentially with 600, 700,000 vulnerabilities if you don't have a good patching program in place. A lot of those are going to be either mediums or lows, which you can, depending on your environment, defer for 60, 90, maybe even 120 days. You want to obviously look at the criticals, but the other thing you can look at besides just the criticals and the highs CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, has a list of known exploited vulnerabilities. It's a great resource because you could have, out of that, say, 700,000 vulnerabilities, you might have 4,000 on your server farm. Well, that's where you're running your business. I mean, it's going to be very, very negative if the servers are attacked and hit with a vulnerability versus even 500 of your other 10,000 endpoints. So prioritization, you have to know where your critical data is. You have to know what your critical assets are. You have to know what's the impact if I'm down for a minute, down for an hour, down for a day. Those are things that most mature CISOs would already have in their back pocket, so they would know. And then you can quantify it. I mean, that's what you have to do. You have to go look at your vulnerability list, quantify it, take it to your CFO, say, this is our exposure, this is the impact to the business if we get hit, and give them quantifiable information. Otherwise, they won't be able to make a decision. And the CFO will feel a little paralyzed, like, I don't even know what to do with this. You've told me I have 700,000 vulnerabilities, but I don't know what that means. That's a number. Does that make sense?
It does. And you mentioned, quantifying downtime and risk and where you run your business. I think a lot of patching tends to focus because I think the industry has focused a lot on tools and automation.
They're easy to buy.
I understand why, and then the marketplace. So what about my firewalls, my internet edge routers, my network equipment? What's the magic tool?
Do not leave those exposed.
What's my magic tool? What's my magic button that patches my network equipment that without any downtime? Right. Right. Like, so when we look at the program approach, I've got my magic tools and automation for PCs, for servers, maybe for some applications. But what's the magic button? How do you I need to take down my core firewalls. I need to take down my core switches because I got to do an iOS patch. How does a CISO, without a partner like CBTS, what's kind of the thinking or the mindset in planning for that?
Well, I certainly faced that dozens of times. I had two different vendors for firewalls, and you have to schedule downtime. And in my environment, we were not 24/7 operations. We weren't an e-commerce store that could never, ever be down. We're a higher education environment, so we scheduled it for slow periods. It could take 8 hours to upgrade a firewall because sometimes that doesn't go well. And sometimes you're on the phone with the vendor and, that vendor's got to be available to you to say, oh, you tried to go from, OS version 7.1.2 and you went to 7.1.5.
Right.
You got to do 7.1.2, 0.3, 0.4. Then you can go to 0.5.
And then you get to be the one who finds the
known
bug that didn't make it through UAT test.
And editing configuration files in a text editor when you're like looking at the clock going, okay, I gave everybody one more hour. I'm either going to have to send out a notification saying there's been a problem with this upgrade and the network will be offline for another 2 hours, or you're like, let's get it in there and let's see what happens. So it is possible to do it by yourself. It is possible to and you definitely want to. There's been a number of vulnerabilities that have come out in the Fortinet space, and I'm not picking on them, except they have 300. The last time I looked, the vulnerability was disclosed June 1st or May 29th, so very recent. They announced it. They got the patch out a day later, maybe 2 days later at the most. There were still 300,000 Fortinet firewalls with SSL VPNs that had not been patched. 30 days later. That's a super high risk. That's a big vulnerability. So,
hey guys, I'd like to jump in right now. Is patch management regulated by compliance and regulatory requirements today?
Yes. I touched on that very briefly about 10 minutes ago. But there are definitely...
To be fair, that was probably when the question came in, but I didn't want to interrupt you then. So
Fair enough. Yeah, no, definitely there are compliance compliance rules that you have to follow that will mandate patching. The cadence, I'm not familiar with a particular regulation off the top of my head, but there are definitely regulations that require that you do patching. And as you said, the cyber insurance folks are getting on the bandwagon too and saying, if you don't have a patching program, just like if you don't have multi-factor authentication, we're not going to write an insurance policy for you.
Yep.
So that's a big vulnerability.
Yeah, I think what it comes down to, we talk with customers all the time, and this is on average, we see about 55% successful patch rate when I talk to customers. And I ask,
And by that,
the ones who can score it,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Some don't even score it. And when we do our patching as a service, it's a 95% SLA. Not only that, we're also...
And you might want to explain to people what that means.
Yeah, so 95% of the things that we attempt to patch, we have a success rate of 95% of the things that are within our control. But we're also going to come back to you, for example, if we go and patch 1,000 desktops and 8 fail because they don't have enough disk space, that's not going to hit our SLA. We can't be responsible for your disk space, but you also know you've got 8 laptops out there that probably need to be refreshed and are probably overrun and overloaded. Or
and then it becomes a meaningful metric because
Correct.
you've quantified your risk, which, again, as I said earlier, the CFO wants to quantify this risk. They want to have an idea of how big is my exposure.
And so I was talking, what are the 2 things that make us successful? And then we'll talk about a little bit of the value statement to the CFO. But to the CISO or to the network team, I look at 2 things. The first is internet-facing relays, right?
Oh, my God.
So I don't need you to VPN into the network, so I can hit your devices. That's huge. When you've got 20,000 devices out there and most people are using SaaS applications and O365 and not coming into the network as much, an internet-facing relay, also not to mention not having to build out as many deep distribution points or relays in your network to take those patches. But the second piece is we are not the friend of the application owner or the server owner.
Yeah.
I see all the time, hey, we're going to patch this server on Saturday at 2 a.m.
Right.
I've got a friend's wedding that weekend. I can't be available. Can you exclude, because my application's running on that server? Oh, sure, right? Because we, see each other in the break room.
Right.
All of a sudden, a third party, it's, and we build out this schedule where we'll build out, here's your maintenance windows and here's your fallback. You
Right.
can be excused. We understand you might have something, then it's going to automatically get patched in the secondary window.
Right.
And so I think removing that personal element of, hey, do me a favor.
Oh, yeah.
I don't want to be involved in this patching, has been a huge success. The second, so that's on the network and the CISO side. Why our 95% is so attainable. Why to a CFO it's so important. We've talked about today. I need a good tool for vulnerability scanning. I got to pick what that is. I got to get a good tool for patch management. I got to pick what that is. Maybe a tool for automation. That's a third tool.
Depending on the size of the org.
Yep. Now, and we talked about that does nothing for me in my network world where I still need to, review the release notes when they come out and look for backwards incompatibilities and schedule downtime to take, all of these sorts of things. But you started out by saying, well, I'm scheduling like 4 hours a month to maintenance, right?
At a minimum, right.
Right. Now, I'm sure that's grown, but let's say it's 40 hours a month. Let's say it's 80 hours a month. That's still, how do you go and build a dedicated full-time team to this? And so there's an economy of scale where we say, you're going to have to go and buy 2, maybe 3 tools, maybe more. I'm sure there's plenty of tool sprawl in this space and shelfware. And you're going to have to hire a team who does this as their main job. But also, they're only going to be doing it 40% of their time.
What else do you want them to do?
What else do you want them to do?
Yeah.
Or you can hit an easy button for a full packaged, wrapped in, we're going to bring the tools to the table for vulnerability scanning, vulnerability assessments, vulnerability remediation. We're going to bring the tools for patching. We'll bring the tools for automation. We'll bring the people, project managers. We'll oversee all of your different departments that need to be engaged in a patch, all for a fixed monthly fee. And all of a sudden, your folks can go and do their own, what they want to focus on.
Yeah.
When you're sitting in your CISO chair, talk to me about the benefit of that versus, is there a concern of handing that over to somebody else? Do you want to hand that over? Is there a little trepidation?
I always operated with a very lean staff. I was nobody ever came to me with a pile of money and said, John, improve, our cybersecurity posture. I always had to take advantage of every disaster whenever it occurred. If it was a hard drive in a server that failed and suddenly email wasn't available for 3 days, and you'd think I had taken candy from several small babies, and the screams and wails were deafening, to say the least. So, there are, as a CISO, when you're in that seat, there's definitely an advantage to being able to say, look, this is a fixed, specific window. We've got a vendor partner that we trust that, your application might fail. Now, again, in that case, you always want to have a test environment so that you can test out these patches before you roll them out. So you don't end up with that window that has to slide to a longer length of time. But I definitely like having partners that I can rely on to defer this to, because like I said, patching is essentially a commodity. It's essentially it's a very critical point, but it's a thing that very few people want to do. And once you get good at doing it, which CBTS is, because I've talked with Chris DeBrunner and the guys that are on that team, this is rote. I mean, you want to get somebody that this is their bread and butter. They're used to doing it. It's not going to be a surprise. But if you're a little bit of a control freak, and I'm not saying that I am, but some people might have said I am, you're a little worried about handing off that patching to somebody until you have that trust. So I can see why it would take a little bit of time to develop that trust to say, all right, we're going to, kick the tires a little bit. Let's see what happens. Maybe we'll do a 12-month contract. We're not going to do 36 months, but, let's see how it goes. And when you can start to return reports and SLAs at 95%, you're going to build up a lot of trust in your vendor partner and say, okay, I've mitigated a risk. And you can go back to your cyber insurance carrier and say, boom, see, we've got this. And then you get deliverables, you get reports. You get reports that say, this is our patch rate. One of the customers I work with, they had a patch window. I was working with them and I said, here's a patch. And they're like, oh, that's an application. We haven't really patched that server for a year. And I'm like, that's not good. And I said, how critical is it to your environment? Well, every teacher uses it. I was like, okay, that's critical. And I said, why haven't you patched it? Well, because every teacher uses it. I'm like, okay, that's redundant and circular. But I said, let's patch this over a weekend and be prepared to fall back in case it doesn't come up gracefully after a year of missed patches. They followed half of my advice. They did do it over a weekend. They didn't have that fallback, so they were down for a week while they worked with the vendor, because the vendor hadn't updated the application to address the vulnerabilities that were in it. Once that was done, suddenly a critical piece of their infrastructure was not vulnerable to a whole catalog of exploits because they got it patched.
And that's the people, hey, we don't want to, we'll give you a pass on it. And the more you kick the can down the road, the harder it gets.
It doesn't get better.
Take a bite of the elephant. And we see a lot of customers, we're talking about earning the trust. Maybe it's, hey, here's my endpoints or my cloud-based servers, things that I can quickly, migrate workloads or something like that. And we work up to network, right? But think about how many vulnerabilities you solve just by successfully patching PCs.
Hey guys, I have another question that came in. Are there any applications or assessments in place to help a company understand what assets and inventory they have to figure out where they even want to start with the patching program?
Tenable, Nessus. That's the known vulnerability scanning tool that's out there. Qualys is another vendor that's out there. I'm sure there's a third one, but off the top of my head, Tenable and Qualys seem to have the majority of the market. I don't know what else you...
So those are the two I run into the most. So Tenable is a great partner of ours. I do run into Qualys quite a bit. I think that the other aspect is, what is an assessment, not just a tool to say, hey, here's the vulnerabilities that you have, meaning the CVEs that have been reported by OEMs in the internet community, but what are my other vulnerabilities? And we have an entire program here dedicated to those types of assessments, of coming in and not just running an automated scan of what your vulnerabilities are, but trying to penetrate you, doing a penetration test and trying to go east-west and trying to show you.
That would be the team I'm on.
Yeah.
Yes. Our security team, we have 7 or 8 vulnerability and penetration testers who can see whether or not, okay, you've patched your servers and your systems, can we still get in?
Yeah.
And that's important.
I think that's wildly important. I think the way we structure our security practice here, of kind of separation of church and state. So we've got our team of professional services that come in and do the assessments, or will do the remediation work, will be an extension of your security team. We then have the security services where we do it for you, right?
Sure.
Where you just hand it over to us. And then we have our security experts around. There are a ton of tools and tool sprawls, and I see every day a new logo that I'm like, what's that? I've never heard of that. And then I go and Google, and they're, the latest in whatever you want to call it, they're the latest SOAR technology, and trying to keep up with security acronyms is harder than networking. So to me, the fact that we can come in and we're the puzzle piece, you tell us where you want to fit in. We'll come in, spend 6 months in your environment, letting you know exactly what's there, what's vulnerable, and then can tell you, here's what you should do to fix it. And then you can say, hey, we'd like you to
fix it.
We'll like you to fix it, or we'd like to buy those tools from you to fix it, or we're done growing this team. Can you just be an easy button for us to make our life easy? And what I enjoy about that is not only does it make the customer's life easy, it makes Chris DeBrunner's life harder, and I get a little bit of joy out of that as well.
He's got a big challenge, but the good thing is he's done it for dozens of customers with tens of thousands of endpoints. Chris, shout out to Chris DeBrunner. Good job. You should be down here.
Yeah, so it sounds to me like it's just not as easy as purchasing an application and installing it, and boom, you're ready. Right? It sounds like you need experts involved, whether that's in staff, using your current staff or outsourcing.
Well, experience is gleaned from doing things and not getting the result you want. So if you don't have the experience, you either buy it or you're going to get it the hard way.
Yeah. And by the way, how many customers are 100% safe from ever, whether they're CBTS customer or not? How many companies out there are 100% safe from from getting attacked?
Zero.
Right? It's not if, it's when.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. But the advantage is,
I'll show you. I have no computers at my business.
yes, says the man surrounded by technology.
Right.
Gartner had this statistic out, and I know we're getting close to time. 80 to 90% of the attacks are tied to a vulnerability. And typically what happens these days, yes, it's probably going to be a phishing email, but once malware is deployed on an endpoint, somebody's computer, they then look for a vulnerability somewhere else to exploit.
Yep.
So yes, you can say that the end user is one of the main attack surfaces. I certainly wouldn't disagree with that statement, but if you have patched endpoints, if you have patched network gear, if you have patched servers, yeah, the malware's downloaded, the malware has, detonated. They may not be able to get a, escalation of privileges. They may not be able to do anything else after that because you've kept your environment patched.
You got in the building, but every room's locked.
Yeah, exactly.
And guys, there's another good one that came in, and this, we hear the buzzword zero trust all the time, right? And they're asking,
I live by zero trust, Lance.
I got you. I don't trust you. That's for sure. How does patching play into zero trust buzzword? If it does at all, how does it play into that?
Patching is not a specific part of the NIST zero trust framework, but it would be a part of a standard security practice.
Here's what I would say is, like, there's the NIST definition on ZTNA that I'm sure John would recite backwards.
It's only on page 17.
But I think of ZTNA as almost, every employee is a firewall. And I know it goes further than that now, if every application is also a firewall and all of those things. But at its root, ZTNA is me as an individual. I have an identity, and what can I access? And so to me, patching of endpoints, whether that be my mobile device, whether it be my PC, is part of keeping me as an individual. I'm a firewall. I need to be true. So I've got 20,000 employees. You've got 20,000 firewalls. That's what ZTNA, and so patching along with endpoint detection and response, and along with, I'm not saying it's foolproof, but so I wouldn't say it's part of the ZTNA framework, but to me, ZTNA is making every employee their own firewall. Patching any device that they're bringing to access company information would certainly go a long way.
Yeah, and just one final thing on that, in terms of one of the core components of zero trust is to make sure that the device that you log into, so you log into your phone, you can log into a PC, you present identity credentials, and then if you have a zero trust environment deployed, and remember, folks, it's not a product, it's not a SKU, it's a principle or a guiding principle. So you present identity credentials on a device, you should be able to interrogate that device automatically to determine whether or not it has the correct posture, where you could say, have the latest patches been applied? And if the latest patches are not applied, then you don't get access.
Right.
So yes, Lance, that was a really long-winded answer to your question.
And to be fair, I hope I didn't hurt your feelings. I trust you a little bit. A little bit.
I completely understand that. Yes.
Yeah.
I think we're at time. And I will wrap this up by saying, seriously, to anybody listening, you should have a patching program. Even if you're just doing Microsoft Patch Tuesday on your personal home computer, you want to stay patched. Apple released a patch yesterday for their iOS devices. The world's changed. We're all targets of attack by various threat actors, criminals, and you want to do the simple things: patch your devices, patch your mobile devices, patch your laptops, and stay safe out there.
Can't beat that.
Can't touch it.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining today. Thank you, Johns. It was great. And till next time, take care.
Thanks, Lance.
Thanks, Lance.